What's up, art fans? Today we'll be taking a look at Mozart and his operas. We will look at some of his most famous operatic works and attempt to contextualize his effect on the classical era music during his short but incredibly productive life. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart was born on January 27, 1756 and died on December 5, 1791. He lived during the classical period in music history and was responsible for much of its success. The classical era is considered to have been from 1730 to about 1820. It is theorized that Mozart wrote over 600 musical works. 600. Like, what? He only lived to be about 35, guys. The man was a freak of nature. He basically wrote one song every other month from the time he was 10 until he died. Greatness. Today, though, we're going to focus on his operas. He wrote 22 operas, and 10 of them he penned as a teenager. 10. Many scholars and observers of Mozart say that his work has withstood the test of time, while many of his contemporaries have not. Because of this, the Austrian-born Mozart is considered to be one of the greatest opera composers who ever lived, and many consider him to be the greatest composer, period. Under his dad's stewardship, young Wolfgang was composing piano concertos by age 4. Shortly thereafter, he wrote his first symphony and wrote the opera Bastien Bastien when he was 11. Young Wolfgang probably would have been happy to stay at home and compose operas for fun, but Daddy Leopold, Wolfie's father, had other ideas. To show off his genius son, he packed up young Wolfgang and his older sister Nannerl and toured them all over Europe. Everywhere they went, Leopold touted his son as a scientific phenomenon. One of his posters in England said, "To all lovers of sciences, the greatest prodigy that Europe or that even human nature has to boast of is, without contradiction, the little German boy, Wolfgang Mozart." By age 13, Wolfgang found a job as a concertmaster of an orchestra and organist of the court of the Archbishop of Salzburg, where he worked for 12 years. When Mozart grew up, he moved to Vienna to seek his fortune. Vienna was a center of musical activity, and he had been successful on tour there as a child prodigy. But Mozart wasn't a child prodigy anymore, and he had a hard time finding steady work. Without a steady job, Mozart sustained himself in Vienna by writing operas. During this time, Mozart married a young woman named Constance Weber. Perhaps to commemorate this happy occasion, he used the name Constance for the heroine in his exotic comic rescue opera, The Abduction of Saraglio. This opera had everything: great tunes with trendy Turkish sounding effects, a wacky story, harems, and other exotic attractions, and great escape scenes. It had something else. It was German, the language of the people for whom it was written, rather than Italian like most operas. Mozart believed in communicating directly to the people, and he was supported by the Emperor of Austria-Hungary, Joseph II. To Mozart, it came pretty naturally. Mozart was especially good at opera. His melodies were simple, yet graceful and full of feeling. He loved writing parts for characters to sing simultaneously, and he managed to make all the words very clear. He also mastered the orchestra's colors, using cleverly chosen groups of instruments to create special effects and sounds. Furthermore, Mozart had a knack for picking the right plays to turn into operas. One of his best picks was a play called The Marriage of Figaro, a hilarious and very controversial send-up of contemporary society and politics. This opera offers great examples of the kind of realistic motivations that drive Mozart's characters. 1 year after the premiere of Figaro, the city of Prague commissioned Mozart to write an opera to celebrate the marriage of the emperor's niece. And what solemn story did he choose to musicalize this sacred union? The tale of Don Juan, the sleaziest sex maniac of them all. The opera was called Don Giovanni, and it was a smash hit. Lorenzo da Ponte. No matter how great you are, you can always use a little bit of help. Mozart doesn't deserve all the credit for his sensational operas. After all, he only composed the music. The rest of the credit goes to the guy who wrote the words, the libretto. Considered by many to be Mozart's best librettist was Lorenzo da Ponte. Together they wrote 3 famous operas: The Marriage of Figaro, Don Giovanni, and Così fan tutte. These 3 productions were the high point of what they call opera buffa, a farcical musical comedy. Here's a few facts for you to help you understand a little bit more about Mozart's operas. Mozart's operas typically belong to either opera seria, the opera buffa, comic opera, or the German Singspiel. His later works are generally considered his best, though many of his early works, such as Bastien, which he wrote when he was 11, have been increasingly appreciated by opera experts and fans of the past years. The opera seria is the classic 17th and 18th century opera, often based on mythological Greek and Roman tragedies of the heroic stories. Usually, emperors, kings, and other aristocratic personalities will commission an opera seria to legitimize their powers. Opera buffa, or comic opera. The opera buffa is a comic Italian opera in contrast to the opera seria. It was created after the opera seria around 1750 and was very popular in Vienna during the classical era. A few famous opera buffas written by Mozart are The Marriage of Figaro, Don Giovanni, Così fan tutti, and The Magic Flute. The German Singspiel. It is often characterized by spoken dialogue, which is alternated with ensembles, songs, ballads, and arias, which are often strophic or folk-like. Singspiel plots are generally comic or romantic in nature, and frequently include elements of magic, fantastical creatures, and comically exaggerated characterizations of good and evil. Let's take a look at a few of Mozart's operas. The first, Don Giovanni. It premiered in 1787 in Prague. The libretto was Lorenzo da Ponte, and it took about 2 hours. Don Giovanni is based on the legends of Don Juan, a fictional character, libertine, and seducer. It was premiered by the Prague Italian Opera at the National Theatre of Bohemia, now called the Estates Theatre, on 29 October 1787. Da Ponte's libretto was billed as a drama giocoso, a common designation of his time that denotes a mixing of serious and comic action. Mozart entered the work into his catalog as the opera buffa. Although sometimes classified as comic, it blends comedy, melodrama, and supernatural elements. The Magic Flute. The Magic Flute premiered in 1791 in Vienna. The libretto was Emanuel Schikaneder. It was a 2-act opera. The famous arias are the aria of the Queen of the Night. Arguably the most popular Mozart opera, The Magic Flute has enchanted both adults and children alike. Its plot is a little easier than most Mozart operas. In the opera, the Queen of the Night persuades Prince Tamino to rescue her daughter, Pamina, from captivity under the high priest Sarastro. Instead, he learns the ideals of the Sarastro community and seeks to join it. Separately, then together, Tamino and Pamina undergo several trials of initiation, which end in triumph. With the queen and her cohorts vanquished, the earthy Papageno, who accompanies Tamino on his quest, fails the trials completely, but is rewarded anyway with the hand of his ideal female companion, Papageno. The Marriage of Figaro. Premiered in 1786 in Vienna, the libretto was once again Lorenzo da Ponte, and the duration was about 3.5 hours. It's a 4-act opera. It tells how the servants Figaro and Susanna succeed in getting married, foiling the efforts of their philandering employer, Count Almaviva, to seduce Susanna and teaching him a lesson in fidelity. As usual for comic Mozart operas, The Marriage of Figaro ends with 3 happy couples. The opera is a cornerstone of the repertoire and appears consistently among the top 10 in the Opera Base list for the most frequently performed operas. The Marriage of Figaro also contains some of the most popular pieces of music in Mozart's catalog, namely the overtures and the arias. Mozart and Prague. "My Praguers understand me," exclaimed Mozart. Vienna was less kind to Mozart and his music. Prague, on the other hand, responded enthusiastically when his opera, The Marriage of Figaro, was presented to the city for the first time. Several Prague citizens banded together and paid Mozart's way to Prague so that he could hear their rendition of his opera. Mozart arrived in January 11, 1787 to a welcoming city. On January 18th, he gave the premiere of his concert, his symphony in D major, which is now also called the Prague Symphony. He had been given a reception equal to that of a modern-day celebrity, and his gratitude ran deep. Don Giovanni, revisited. On October 29, 1787, Mozart's opera Don Giovanni premiered in Prague at the Estates Theater. The city went wild for it, and it received rave reviews in the press. Mozart was asked to remain in Prague to write another opera, but he decided to return to Vienna. It is thought that he was eager to apply for a court position that had just opened, owing the death of the previous incumbent. Another theory is that Vienna had more talented musicians than Prague. Mozart would only return to Prague once more in 1789. He died 2 years later. While the city of Vienna tossed his body into a common grave, the people of Prague went into mourning when they heard the news of his death. In conclusion, Mozart is one of the greatest musical minds to ever walk the planet Earth. He was a true virtuoso in every sense of the word, and he revolutionized music forever. He has and will continue to influence great generations of composers, musicians, and artists of all types. His music will live on forever, or for as long as we have the internet, which is probably forever. You should be excited about that. He is the truth. Thanks for lending me your ears and your eyeballs. Stay tuned for more random video that we post. Until next time, our fans.